Good morning. It is great to see everybody here for this Lord's Day, another Lord's Day that we could come together and worship our Father in heaven and edify and lift one another up. And we have this wonderful weather out there. We need the rain, and even when it ruins our plans, so to speak, or I think Wayne mentioned something how it kind of aggravates us sometimes when we have something to do and the rain messes us up. But think about that. We need it, so we'll take it, and we love when God brings us rain. We love when God brings us the sun. We just love every day that He brings us life. We are so blessed. We are so very blessed that we have the opportunity to be here. We have the opportunity that we could come together and we could have the freedom to worship God. There's places in this country where they do not have the freedom to worship God. Not Jesus Christ, not the Father in heaven. They claim Christianity and they will be persecuted. And they are underground just like they were in the first century. It's not just the first century, like Wayne said it in class. People are being persecuted today for being Christians. And we do not have that here. But even if we had that here, even if it got really bad, we would still meet, wouldn't we? We would still come together. We would still worship our God and our Father for what He has done in our lives. It's so happy occasion that we can always be together. Have you ever felt uncertain in your life? And I'm sure everybody has. That's something in your life that you assumed it was coming, that was going to be bad or was going to be the worst. I think we've all been there before where we did not have the confidence and the confidence that we needed to have. So we were uncertain. And in fact, it made us assume that something bad was coming. I have had that in my life, and I can think of a time a long, long ago when I was young. And when I was young, and my dad had me go out for Pop Warner football. I had been playing football with my friends, flag football at school, in the streets. I'd chalk up the street and for 100 yards and play football, and I just loved the game. And so I went out for Pop Warner football, and I was knee high to a grasshopper. I was very, very small, and I got cut. Yeah, they cut people then. Even little guys, they cut. And so, okay, my head was in the clouds. I love the sport, but I never had a organized tackle football team that I played on. And then so I went out the second year. Guess what happened? Yep, I got cut again. And then one day I'm out in the street with some friends and we're playing street football, and here comes one of my friends who actually made the team. And he had to cut through the street at the end of our court, or at the beginning of our court, to go to his house. So I see him coming on his bike, and there he is wearing the uniform. I remember that maroon jersey and the white letters and the gray pants, and he had his pads on. And I was like, oh, that's so cool. But then I got a little upset after that. I got a little jealous, like that should be me, and I actually felt worse. So then I thought to myself, I'm not going out again. I said, I was discouraged, and I just assumed I would go out a third time and then I would be cut a third time. So with some encouragement from my dad, he was not going to not let me go. He forced me to go. He says, "You're going to go. You're going to keep trying until you make it." And I'm so happy that he forced me and he pushed me, because I went and I made the team. And then I actually worked myself into becoming a starter. And then I went all the way through high school, and not to brag, but I got letters to go play college football because that's what I love to do. And I pushed myself, but I was about to quit because I assumed that I was not going to make that team. We have all assumed things in our lives. We've all been in a position of a perception where we thought something was not going to turn out right for us. We just thought, the worst is going to happen. I'm not going to do that. Or you fear something, and what happens? It ends up not coming true. Maybe sometimes things do happen, but a lot of times when we feel this way, we're just assuming the worst, and it ends up being fine. It ends up being good. Sometimes it ends up being great. And so we have to remember that. We have to remember, because assumption is a problem for each and every one of us. It's a problem that we see out in society, and it really comes under judgment at times, right? That you assume, so you judge. And our perception about something or someone can be flawed. It often is flawed. I know mine. When I have that perception, when I'm assuming something, it often is flawed. And it causes me to have the lack of confidence when I assume things. You know, the old adage goes, to assume makes a fool out of you and me. And of course, I'm using the PG version of that. But the fact is we leave God out of the equation and then we assume something bad is going to happen. So when our focus is on God, there will be no room to assume. In the book of Matthew, and you could turn to Matthew chapter 14. We're going to get there in just a few minutes. But and back in chapter 13, Jesus spoke in parables to his disciples. And just after he taught the crowd about the parable of the sower, his disciples asked him a question. He says, "Why do you speak to them in parables?" And Jesus answers, "To you it has been granted to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it has been granted." Or he's done not been granted. Excuse me. Verse 12. For whoever has to him more shall be given, and he will have an abundance. But whoever does not have, even what he has shall be taken away from him. Verse 13. Therefore I speak to them in parables, because while seeing, they do not see. While hearing, they do not hear, nor do they understand. Matthew chapter 13 and verse 10 and through 13. And then, of course, the prophecy of Isaiah in the next two verses in 14 and 15 in Isaiah chapter 6, verse 9 through 12. That is the prophecy there actually being fulfilled. But his disciples, although they were granted the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, those that was revealed to them, they still did not understand everything that Jesus was teaching them. And definitely they were like us. You know, they're human, that human nature. They had doubt. You know, they had some doubt in their lives. At times they were selfish. They wanted to be first in his kingdom. They had fear that came upon them. And they also assumed. They assumed, which we're talking about this morning. So now we come into chapter 14. And if you're not already there, turn there. But chapter 14 starts out the account of John the Baptist. And here in this account, we have Herodias, Herodias' daughter, actually, had danced. King Herod, his wife Herodias, her daughter, she danced before King Herod for his birthday. And King Herod, he liked it very much. And he told her, he said to her that anything that you want that you could have. And this was prompted by her mother Herodias. She asked for the head of John the Baptist to be brought to her on a plate, on a platter. Matthew chapter 14 and 1 through 11. And that actually happened to John the Baptist because of that. Very evil. You know, the scene in the show, The Chosen. I don't know if you've watched The Chosen, but there's a scene in The Chosen that's going to show you that. I'm not going to, mess it up for you because it happens in the Bible. But when you actually see it happening, when you see this account taking place, and then we could read it and we could be like, that's not good and that's sad. But when you're watching it take place, it really hits the heart, doesn't it? And especially when it comes to his disciples, when they know about it. And you will be seeing this if you go see the movie, but you could just read in the scriptures the account of John the Baptist getting beheaded because of evil. And that's what we say. It's just because of evil. So when we look at the text and we see the text, we see the disciples, they bury his body and then they brought the bad news to Jesus in Matthew chapter 14 and verse 12. And so Jesus, hearing that news, he leaves the boat and he goes to a secluded place. And of course, Jesus always went to a secluded place. So he went to a secluded place and I'm sure that he prayed. And hearing this, the people follow Jesus. So you're going to have Jesus' disciples following him, and you're going to have the people following him. They follow him into the cities, and Jesus goes ashore, and he comes to a large crowd of people. And the Bible tells us there that Jesus felt compassion for these people, and he went about healing the sick. Matthew chapter 14 and verse 13 and 14. And then we get to the account that Jesus instructs his disciples to go out and to feed that multitude, to feed the 5,000. Again, when you watch if you see season 3 of The Chosen, Jesus and his disciples, They're preaching. He's preaching to the crowd. He has them preaching to the crowd as he is, and they're off and they're preaching so that people could actually hear what Jesus is saying, because there's a lot of people there, isn't it? And it started during the day, and now they're approaching evening. It was a long day, and the crowd was hungry. See, the crowd had very little to eat. I put myself in that crowd, and I probably would have been complaining a little bit that I'm hungry, all day long, hearing the preaching. I need a bite to eat. They didn't have DoorDash, right? They couldn't go out and go to a drive-through at McDonald's or something to get something to eat. They're just sitting there and they're hungry. And the text states that Jesus' disciples, they go to him, and it's getting late, and they want Jesus to send these people away to go find the food for themselves. Matthew chapter 14 and verse 15. And then Jesus tells them, don't send them away. He says, feed them. Verse 16. His disciples assumed there was not nearly enough food for 5,000 mouths to feed. See, the thing is their perception led to their assumption. Sometimes our perception leads to our assumption, doesn't it? I know mine has, and it's not a good thing. 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish is what they saw that they had, that they could feed these people. And we're not talking about loaves of bread that together could fill a whole living room. Or we're not talking about the size of these fish were like bluefin tuna. One of my favorite programs is Wicked Tuna. And when they catch some of these fish, I mean, even a fish that's 250 pounds to me is enormous. And then they catch these fish that are 500-600 pounds. They didn't have 2 fish weighing, anywhere between 1,000 and 1,200 pounds. They had 2 fish, 2 little fish to feed them. I mean, if they would have had those huge tuna, it would have still been a stretch. But we could actually say, okay, that makes more sense. With all this bread, it's kind of silly to think about 5 loaves of bread to fill a house full. But they, of course, that's silly, and they did not have that. They did not have enough food, at least in their eyes. Why? Why did they have this doubt? Or why did they assume that they couldn't feed the 5,000? Think about us being there. How would we approach that? I think I would have a little bit of, no, we don't have enough. But the thing is, why they thought that is because they were not seeing Jesus for who he really was. They were not seeing Jesus for the power that he has, for what he has done. I mean, think about that, what he has done for them. Therefore, what he was and capable of doing, they denied. They did not think that Jesus could perform this, or they would have said, okay, we will go feed them. But human nature took over. They assumed that they did not have enough. And we think about this, would Jesus actually tell them to go feed the 5,000 if he was not going to provide the food for that many mouths? He would never have done that. Do we see Jesus for who he is and for what he has done so far in our lives? Do we see Jesus for what he is going to do in our lives today, in the future? Do we see that? See, sometimes I believe that we live our lives like the disciples. We may believe, we may follow, we trust. We say, I love Jesus. We come together for Bible study. We come together for worship. But then when it comes to certain things in our lives, we deny him. We deny that he could do the impossible. Because we see it through our eyes. And that's why we assume. Assumption makes a fool out of us, doesn't it? Jesus knew that there was not enough food, but they saw. What did Jesus want them to do? He wanted them to let the crowd know there was not enough to feed them, because he was going to show his power. He wanted the disciples to make that known. He wanted the people to look at him, to realize that he was going to work in their lives. He was going to create another miracle for them. We see that in 17 and verse 18. And look at verse 19 and 20 states, ordering the people to sit down on the grass, he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up toward heaven, he blessed the food, and breaking the loaves, he gave it to the disciples, and the disciples gave it to the crowds. And they all ate and were satisfied. They picked up what was left over of the broken pieces, 12 full baskets. So again, in the chosen, they show the disciples, and they show that they have these baskets, and they go about feeding the people, with the bread and with the fish, and the baskets never get empty. I don't know how it all went down. I don't know how exactly, we know God's power was working, though. God was making sure there was enough food in those baskets to feed those 5,000 people. Just like at the wedding at Cana. We go back, we think of the wedding at Cana, and how he took those 6 barrels, those barrels of waters, and filled those barrels with water, and he turned that water into wine when the host ran out of wine for their guests. It was his power then. It's his power working in their lives right here. And it just gives us more evidence to show that Jesus is that prophet Moses spoke of, who fed the people bread from heaven. See, this is what the crowd took at this event to take place. They took it, like John chapter 6 and verse 14 says, therefore, when the people saw the sign which he had performed, they said, this is truly the prophet who is to come into this world. You think the people weren't looking at this and saying, whoa, wow, no man, no regular man could do this. The Son of God could do this. The Son of God has the power to do this. And you think about what started as a basket from a young lad with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish ended up being full. All 12 of the baskets being full. So when we look at that example right there of what they had in the beginning and what they had after they had after they had fed, I had turned that off, so I'm sorry about that. After we had fed, he had fed all the 5,000. Here we have a basket for the apostles. We have 12, and actually the young lad has a basket, and it's full of bread and it's full of fish. 12 times more than what the child had in the beginning. We could say a parable to the effect that no man ever gave anything to Christ, but what he gave them back, compounded and multiplied. What did he do for Job? You think about, what does God do for you when you work for him? We don't serve God so we may be blessed tenfold or 12-fold or 100-fold. We work for God. We serve God. We follow God because we love him. But we see the service of his people and what they're doing and how blessed the people were from their faith. They ended up saying, okay, Lord, I'm going to feed these people. And they're amazed to see that these baskets were kept being full of bread and full of fish. Wouldn't you be? And think about, wouldn't you be if you were told to do that? I think I would have a little bit of doubt there. I think I may assume, I don't think we have enough. But you've got to look, who are they following? Jesus is going to fill our spiritual baskets when we are hungry if we allow him to. John chapter 6 and verse 35. We cannot be spiritually satisfied without Christ. Try to go out there and to be spiritually satisfied. If you don't have Jesus with you, you are not going to find that happiness in Christ Jesus. In fact, we cannot survive spiritually without Jesus in our lives, without Jesus in our hearts, without walking with him each day. We could try all we want to live happy lives, but we won't be truly satisfied without being with Christ Jesus, without following him. Now, another assumption we see that takes place is in a boat in the sea. Immediately following the event of feeding the 5,000, Jesus has his disciples, and they're in the boat, and they're told to go across the sea to the other side. And he sends the crowds away, and then again, he goes up onto the mountain, and he goes up on the mountain to pray. And it was evening, and he was there alone. Now a storm comes up upon the disciples in this boat, just like in Matthew chapter 8. Little different, though. But this storm, it was battering against the boat. But it says the winds were contrary to each other, and it kept these disciples from actually crossing. And they're about 3 miles away from shore, and they're out here in the sea. Peter and the apostles in this boat, Matthew chapter 14 and verse 22 through 25. And his disciples assume what was not so. So they look out, and they look out to the sea, and they see a figure coming towards them. It says, when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified. Why were they terrified? Because they assumed that Jesus was a ghost. Verse 26. They didn't say Jesus is coming towards us. See, imagine if you were in this boat. I put myself actually in this boat. I think about what I would have done. I'm sitting in the boat, and all of a sudden we look out on the sea, and a figure's walking towards the boat. I mean, human nature, we're going to get a little scared, aren't we? We're going to get a little afraid. We're not going to think about who it could be other than, I would say, it has to be a spirit. It has to be a ghost coming at me. Would our first thought be, here comes Jesus? I don't think it would be. But we think about his disciples here. We think about what Jesus had done. He had cleansed the leper. He healed Peter's mother-in-law. He had gone about casting out demons. He went and he healed a paralytic. He healed a woman suffering from having a hemorrhage for 12 years. Of course it's Jesus. But they didn't think it was Jesus. They were terrified. I am not sure if I would have reacted any differently than they did. I'd want to say, hey, I just watched him, another miracle, right? He just fed the 5,000. We're out on the sea. It's got to be him. We all in this life, we believe we're here. We believe we follow Jesus. We love Jesus. We love God. But at times we deal with these human emotions in our lives. It's just part of who we are. We have anxiety, and we have fear, and we have doubt, and we have worry. We have anger. And we show assumption in our lives, don't we? It's not a good thing to assume things. So I think I could relate to the disciples here. If I was sitting in the same boat and I saw something coming to me, I would probably be scared and say, that's a ghost. And think about this. Think about this storm here in Matthew 14. It's different. It's different than the one in chapter 8. When the disciples were on the boat in chapter 8, when they're out there on the Sea of Galilee, who was with them? Yes, Jesus. Jesus was with them. He was on the boat, and he was sleeping there on the boat. So when they got terrified, they did get terrified. They get terrified of what's going to happen to them. They could wake him up. But here, Jesus was not with them. Jesus was off alone praying. He was out of their sight. Where is Jesus right now? Is he out of your sight? He may not be sitting here with us so we could see him. When we go out those doors, when we go to our homes, wherever we go, we can't see him, but we could see him. We could see him. See, they had to walk by faith this time and not by sight. Paul tells us that in 2 Corinthians 5 and verse 7. For we walk by faith and not by sight. See, this time they needed to trust that who that was. They needed to trust who was with them always. They needed to trust that what he can do, what he has done. And I think sometimes I'm not saying we completely forget about it, but we don't think about it when something's approaching us in our lives. Something difficult, something maybe terrifying. We don't think, well, God's right here. I can't see him, but he's right here. His power is right in my life. It's working in my life. And then notice what he tells them in verse 27. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take courage." He says, "It is I. Do what? Do not what? Do not. Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid." I think of the times walking with Christ that I have been afraid. And I'm not saying we have to be completely ashamed about that. We, we at times may worry a little bit. We at times may get a little scared about something. But think about those words. What words of great assurance from our Lord. These words that have been working in the lives of men nearly 2,000 years ago, all the way to us today. To what? Do not fear. Do not be afraid. That's what I got to tell myself when I face hard things in life. Matt, don't be afraid. Jesus has you. He's right there next to you. He loves you. See, this is the first and the last commandment of faith, is to not fear. It's the antidote to any human emotion we may face. And like what we're facing today is we're talking about being people who assume at times. But you can think of all the other ones. It's the antidote to that. Courage. Courage is that antidote. Courage is going to work in your lives for the better, to help you. Jesus wouldn't tell them that if it wasn't the case. When we assume, we lack confidence, and that leads to the negative. It's negative. But I think of Joshua, and I think of David, and I think of Esther, and I think of so many other of these wonderful men and women of faith. How we know they're human beings and they have their problems. At times they were scared in their lives. At times they were unsure. At times they had doubt. And I know that they made assumptions because they're human. But I also know they didn't waver in their faith, the faith they had with God. They went to God. They relied on God. And their faith gave them that courage to face any of their fears, to face any of their uncertainties, to face their giant of enemies in their lives. Assumptions is going to always make us look the fool. If I assume something about something or someone, especially someone, I make a fool out of them and myself. Assumption is called the mother of all mess ups. You probably think of some other things, but it's right up there, isn't it? But all we need to do is to serve God and follow God, because we have a God of holiness. We have the God of perfection. Our God never messes up. Our God holds to what he's going to say or what he said. He keeps his promises. So we don't have to fear. We don't have to even assume anything. Just continue to walk with him. Have that confidence. Have that courage. Because with God, with his truth, we're good. Even though we're going to face problems in our lives. Do you find yourself starting to assume something? Because I know you may as you leave here today. I know I may. Think about the Lord. Think about the example of the disciples and what they assumed and what was really the case. How God's going to work in your lives. He's working in your lives right now. And put it all on him. Trust in him. Walk with him. The lesson is yours today. I hope none of us are people who always go about assuming or always about doubting things. But we have Jesus as our one that we could trust in. That one's going to help get us through the things that we face, the human emotions that drag us, certain ones that drag us down. The lesson is yours today. If you need to respond today, if you need to come today, maybe you have been that person. Maybe you have been person that you have been relying fully on God, and the devil has gotten into your mind, and it's caused you to be negative. It's not a good feeling to be that way, is it? And you need prayer. Let's pray together. Pray when you go home. Pray in the comfort of your room, in your living room, wherever you may be. Find that place. Find that place you can pray to him. It doesn't have to be right now, but if you need to right now, let's get together and let's just pray to God because we know that He's listening. We know that He answers prayers. We know that He's going to comfort us. We know He's going to get us through these negative emotions that we may have in our lives today. So if you need prayer or you're ready to give your life to Christ, you're ready to lay it all down before Him, He says, come. His arms are wide open. Come to me. Come to me and give your life to me. Just trust. Just walk with me. And He will give you rest. He will save your souls. Only Jesus could save you from your sins. Come as we stand and we sing the invitation song.